We are here today, we're going to concentrate on skills, growth, and how we can make West Yorkshire the place to attract business to, and what needs to be put in place, and whether or not we've got the right people around the table that can actually make the decisions, and that we're getting the right level of funding that's available nationally. But as no doubt our business representatives will point out, that a lot of the information they get on funding comes from their accountants and their firms in various other locations. So it's not just down to WICA, there's other people, other major players in terms of investment strategy. So can I just ask our guests if they could just briefly introduce themselves? So can we start with yourself, please?
Yes, Edward. Sorry.
Good morning, I'm Michelle Burton, I'm Head of Employment and Skills at Mine Authority.
Good morning, I'm Felix Kumiampofu. I am Director here, it's not me. I'm Director at the Combined Authority responsible for inclusive economy, skills and culture. Councillor Lewis is in the building, he's just had to take an emergency call. He will come in very shortly.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Martin Hathaway and I'm the Managing Director of Mid Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce, and we cover Calderwood, Kirklees and Wakefield areas.
Good morning, I'm Barney Minor. I'm the Development Manager for the Federation of Small Businesses in West Yorkshire. We're a UK-wide membership organisation supporting, would you believe it, small businesses.
Sarah Bowles, Head of Business here at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Oh, welcome, and you can see the names of the elected members as we go around. We'll get them to introduce themselves when they're asking a question. So let's go through the agenda to begin with. Right, apologies for absence.
Apologies being received from Councillor Roundtree with Councillor Fransmer substituting, Councillor Marchington with John Lawson substituting, and just to note, Councillor Barnes has stepped down and so Helen Brundell is attending.
Yeah, right. So can I thank Councillor Lawson, Councillor Fransmer and Councillor Brundell for stepping in today to be substituting, but I would also like to put on record my thanks to Councillor Barnes for the work that he did on scrutiny and generally within the Combined Authority. He will, from my personal point of view, he will be missed, particularly on his analysis of the budget and holding officers to account. But he contributed a lot to this, and he will be missed. So I just wanted that formally put on in the minutes. So, right, if we can now move on to any declarations. Anybody got any pecuniary declarations? No. Any exclusion? There's no reason to exclude the public. There's nothing, nothing in private. The laugh about that is I asked for 2 papers that went to the Combined Authority on the what were the 2 strategies again? The depot strategy. And we weren't allowed access. Scrutiny has not been allowed access to the papers, so that was why there was the laugh about it. Right, the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January, are they a true record? Any matters arising that they would like to raise? Yes, you have, Councillor Merritt, yeah.
On the recommendations at the end of the paper, the small 4, to set up a bus review working group, I just wondered what's happening on that. Thank you.
Khaled? Do you know what the
We've gathered the members and are progressing kind of their first round of meetings. Councillor Edwards chairs it, so he can. Oh, sorry. So Councillor Edwards chairs it, so he can give you an update later on.
Yeah.
I mean, I said to, it's a case of trying to get the meetings started, to get the meetings arranged, so you'll be here to notice of that, hopefully next week or so, depending on officers' availability.
Okay. Right, so that's item 4. Item 5. So item 5, we've got 3 papers before us: the local growth plan, the business support review, and the skills system review. All 3 of these papers have been through the full Combined Authority and also some of the other themed committees within WICA as well. So they have had some this debate, discussion on them, but at a pretty high level, if the truth be told. So let's look at, we'll start off by looking at the growth plan. Or do you want to introduce yourself? I mean, most people probably know who Councillor Lewis is, but formally we will welcome you. Do you want to introduce yourself, Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor James Lewis. I'm leader of Leeds City Council, but I'm also chair of the Economy Committee here because everybody needs a hobby.
That's usually supporting Leeds United, isn't it? Right. So, local growth plan. Right. Anybody get any particular issues to it that they would like to question? Yes, Councillor Felstead, first of all.
Yeah, well, several issues with it. So I'm just wondering how local growth plans align to local plans, particularly given they're all going through Regulation 19 at the minute. And I'm looking at the map on page 9, and some of the glaring errors on there are that there's principal times not linked with any connectivity at all. So that's my first issue. So does the strategy align with local plans? Just let me move down. So the second area is bullet point 3.7, which are the economic indicators, and I'm just wondering whether that includes businesses that are independent of the combined authority. And then the big one is digital technology. And given the situation we find ourselves in at the minute with lack of educational skills across the region, how is that going to align to the actual strategy? Because this is where the emphasis appears to be on growth in high-tech industries.
Felix, or are you going to delegate to one of your team?
I'll say, I'm not sure I understood the second and third questions.
Right. The second question was, we're actually producing an indicator dashboard to measure the success of the local growth plan. Now, obviously, the combined authority will be in contact with places like chambers of commerce and blah de blah de blah. But there's going to be a lot of businesses that fall outside of that group. So how do we measure what they're doing?
And the third question, something about digital and tech.
Yeah. There's a lot of emphasis throughout the whole report on digital skills, obviously medical tech and things like that. But clearly across the region, we've got a shortage of the skilled workers needed for these jobs. And it's absolutely enormous. So I'm wondering how we're going to get those people into one of the Mayor's promises, which is well-paid, highly skilled, da-de-da employment.
Thank you. I will start with the first one, alignment with local plans. So at a high level, the local growth plan is supposed to align with the 5 local plans that our 5 local authorities produce. But the reality is each local authority produces its local plan at a different time. The timings are not aligned. So one local authority might produce theirs, 3 years ago, another one might be underway now, another one might not start theirs for a few more years. So the reality is that we are always realigning things as we're going along. It's not possible, it's not being possible for everybody to start at the same time and for us to have a local growth plan, then everybody produces their local plan to align with that in that way, and then the timings it just doesn't work. The second point is that even though at a high level there is alignment strategically, they are trying to do different things. So the local plans in local authorities are about designating parcels of land for different uses in response to need and opportunity at a particular point in time, with a lot of legal and public inquiries and etc. So trying to do different things. The local growth plan is about how do we grow the economy? And that will include how we use land, but that is not all it does. It's about, as you said, skills, and it's about different sectors, and it's about the competence of our infrastructure, investment, connectivity, all of that. So yes, there is an alignment at a high level, but they're trying to do different things. They're serving different, if related, purposes. On the business membership, if I've understood the question you were asking, Councillor Felsted, even when we work, and we always, work very closely with Martin and Barney and other partners, if we are, say, tasking or contracting or enabling our business representative bodies to work with us on a particular thing, we always make sure that that is not exclusive to their membership. So it might be the body that might have the responsibility to make X happen, engage with businesses on export or whatever. But we always make sure that that is not exclusive to their membership. And I'll let Martin and Barney, say a bit more about that if you want. And on the digital and tech, you're absolutely right. The West Yorkshire, like a few other areas, especially in the north, has a higher than average proportion of our workforce with no or very low levels of qualifications, and not enough of our workforce with what we call high-level qualifications, university and above, equivalent and above. That is fact, and that was borne out in the evidence that we put out in the local growth plan. But that fact is why the actions that we've then set out in the local growth plan were arrived at. So since then, as you know, we've set up with Wakefield, for example, what we're calling a Future Skills Commission, because Wakefield has almost 20 percentage points gap in the numbers between the high-level attainment in Wakefield's working age population compared to the national average. It's about 10 percentage points in Bradford. It's about 3 or 4 in Kirklees and Huddersfield. Leeds is above the average. But Wakefield is so far behind, we had to look at that. So one of the actions was we've set up this commission. It will report in the summer, and we'll work to implement the recommendations. There are many other such actions in the local growth plan. We've said our ambition is to bring everybody who is able to get to a minimum of level 3 in West Yorkshire. And at one of your previous meetings, one of your colleagues challenged us to say level 3 is too low. And I said, and I feel rightly, that if we can get everybody to level 3, that would be an incredible miracle. So let's do that and see where we go after that. I don't know whether Barney and Martin might want to comment on the business.
Any comments on the issue of business representation?
I was going to probably do what I tend to, and in a way, almost answer a different question. But I think when we talk about, the FSB, we have 3,500 members in West Yorkshire. There's about 100,000 businesses. So, you've got to think about it. And we are the largest business organisation in West Yorkshire. So you've got to think, none of us have them speak for the majority. And also, people join business organisations not because they want to get involved in representational activities, but because they want 24/7 legal advice. They want help with chasing bad debt. So you've got to. I think you've got to reframe how you think about businesses and how you think about engaging with businesses, measuring businesses. Business owners, 90% of businesses are sole traders or micros, and by micros employ 10 or fewer. Business owners aren't organisations, they're individuals. So there's 100,000 individuals, and that's how you've got to start thinking about businesses. And when you're talking about measuring businesses, when you're talking about communicating with businesses, you've got to get into the mindset as you do when you talk about the general population. How do you communicate with communities? You don't go to 2 or 3 people and that you've talked to a community. You need to actually use many different measures, many different methods. You've got to, and it's not easy. There's no shortcuts. And I just think that's the point I want to make. You know, when you talk about businesses, because I think 50, 60 years ago, you know, we would have had a small number of large employers, and so you could cover off most of the employers, you know, quite quickly in a room. You cannot do that anymore. 60% of people are employed by SMEs in the private sector, and it's hard work. But you've got to think, you know, there's no easy ways, and I think it's really important just to state that, just so we don't go down sort of rabbit holes that lead us probably nowhere.
Yeah, I agree with that. You need to work with the businesses that are interested in working with you, and an awful lot of this is unfortunately irrelevant to most businesses, not to business organisations, but less and less people join us because we're representing their views and their needs in the public policy arena anymore. And I'm saying that because I see it as Barney's job and my job to get more and more interested, and we can do that with your help by making it more interesting. I've just pressed print by mistake, James, on the Economy Committee meeting next week, and there's 100 and something pages about that thick, and I was going to bring it in.
Sorry.
No. The point being, if you think you're going to get individual businesses come along to talk about that for 2 hours, then you're mistaken. So it's our job to go out there and to speak to as many businesses as we can and seek their views and to test the market. And that isn't only with members. We interact with many thousands more than just our members. It's just that those that join us do it for different reasons other than representations, as Barney described. And just a comment, if you don't mind, Chair, on the local growth plans that to support Felix. They're all very different and at different stages of their lives. So Wakefield is just in the process of coming up with a new one, of throwing the old one away and coming up with one from scratch, which is great. In Calderdale, it's been going for quite some time and is now being measured and look at the impacts of it. So that's been going since COVID. And in Kirklees, which is the other area I work, it's been being renewed for quite some time, two or three years, I'm afraid. But they're all at very different stages, and they're all written in very different ways. Some are written in isolation with authors. Some are written by consultants without consulting. But the good ones are all written in consultation with lots of people, especially in the way that Wakefield's is currently, I have to say.
All right, thank you. Do you want to come back?
Yes, just one quick thing regarding local growth plans and local plans. The point I was trying to make was lots of the principal towns that will be identified in the local growth plan are already there, but they don't appear to be connected on the actual map.
Felix?
Okay, so this famous map has, I think, done its job because it's engendered a lot of discussion. It's got a lot of people interested in the local growth plan, and so our job is done. It's like, you know, somebody who remained nameless got in a big number in the local growth plan, and that got a lot of news headlines. But that was because we needed it to get the attention, apart from other more serious reasons. You are right. The map in there is not. So you damned if you do, you've damned if you don't. Yeah, if we could have produced a map that had all the towns and cities, you know, principal towns in West Yorkshire on there, and somebody else would say, "You're not making any hard choices here. You're saying you're going to do something for everybody. You're going to connect everybody to everything." But if you do something that you made a few choices and you say, "Right, this is where we're going to focus our growth," then legitimately others will say, "But we're not on there. You're not connecting to us." Somehow you got to stick with something. The map on there shows, it follows how and where people move from and to in West Yorkshire and have done so for like 300 years. It follows our principal movement patterns across West Yorkshire. And we are recognizing that as fact. It doesn't mean other places don't exist or don't matter, but this is where the bulk of our people either live or work or go to have fun. And because of that, this is where our transport infrastructure has been concentrated. Because of that, that is where people, not only where people live, but where the majority of our people work. So it makes sense for us to then think about how if we're going to think about increasing density, where do we do that? Do we do that out of these places where we already have enough infrastructure and we could build on, or not? So the decision on that map is to say we're going to focus our efforts on density along those three corridors, because that is where we already have something to build on. It's not to the exclusion of everything else, but at some point, if you've got a marginal pound, you have to make a decision where you're going to spend it. So the decision is we're going to focus along those corridors when it comes to housing and transport infrastructure and employment, opportunity, etc. Of course, there are other things we're doing in other places that are not on there. Langthwaite Business Park is not along that corridor. Doesn't mean we're not going to invest in it. We've got an active investment plan for that. Likewise, Keithley, we have an active plan to invest there. But this just shows the concentration where our growth corridor opportunities are. One thing we've lacked in West Yorkshire is economic density when it comes to business and employment, and we're trying to respond to that. But we're working along the well-grained path that we've got in terms of where our infrastructure lies.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly on the map, which does provoke debate. Felix is correct about that. Like everybody, like all the elected members sat around the table, I represent a ward which is Kippax and Methley, and I can sit here if you like, and I'll outdo anybody on who represents the most forgotten, marginalised, ignored, stuck on the edge of everywhere ward in West Yorkshire. But fundamentally, which isn't either in a shaded area or with a dotted line across it. I mean, fundamentally, we could get a spray can out and spray all of West Yorkshire, draw lines of everywhere. No one would understand what it is, but everybody at least feel that their bit of West Yorkshire has something there. I mean, the reality is, like Felix says, we know that what holds back the economy in West Yorkshire is poor productivity. How do you improve productivity? It's more density of housing, businesses, and transport infrastructure. We also know in West Yorkshire, because all of us at some point may have sat on a planning committee or will have certainly sat in a full council debate about adopting a local development framework. And we will know that not everywhere in West Yorkshire is suitable for high intensive development because at the moment the infrastructure isn't there, and there's a debate, I'm sure, when you have the transport committee, and if you've not had them in yet, you can go over like the decades of we need to catch up on underinvestment in transport. So the purpose of this is like Felix says, is to try and get us to a position where we're recognising where we are going to deliver like the intensive growth in the years ahead. And that's not to say on other initiatives coming out of this building like bus franchising, which will touch every community in West Yorkshire, that there's not work to try and connect people into it, but it is about recognising that not the entire county from Silsden to South Kirby is going to be appropriate for high intensive development that we need to improve the productivity of the county, and this recognises some of that in it. So I know not everywhere is coloured in on the map, but it is about recognising, like I say, some of the priority corridors and the priority and some of the priority areas. But as Felix has said, some of it as well is around looking on. If you start looking on some of the sectoral stuff, there'll be areas that that have seen intrinsic growth anyway. Think about Production Park in Wakefield, for example. That are doing that, but it is an attempt, like I say, to look about where you can bring together the three things: is transport, business growth, and the physical development of property, both housing, commercial, industrial, and transport.
Can I just add, as a business organisation, I don't want to get involved in whether the spray can's gone in the right places, because I can see I might get in trouble there. But the approach is right. One of the frustrations I have, and Martin hopefully would back me up on this, is that often we talk to local authorities or other bodies, and they only think within their boundaries, and businesses don't act within boundaries. And just because a business is small doesn't mean it's a local business. It could be an international business. I've even got members who sell stuff to Manchester. It's outrageous, but so the approach is really right, because businesses are not constrained by the administrative boundaries that you, but by design, are always going to be.
Yes, just on this, the first question I wanted to ask was this about being described as a centre of excellence, West Yorkshire being described as a centre of excellence. It's difficult to see how a whole of an area like that could be described as a centre. And how do you think our USP, as it were, that competes with the other people who will also be describing their mayoral authorities as centres of excellence, presumably, as opposed to Cambridge and Oxford Triangle, which is genuinely a centre of excellence in all terms. The second point, yeah, I want to bring up is about transport. I mean, we've all looked at the map, and I'm pleased to see that my area is not covered by a colour, but it historically, of course, linked to the northwest. I mean, there's a route through, from my colleague would tell me,
Wrap, yeah.
well, London, Midland and Scottish up to Glasgow and the northwest, as opposed to concentrating on the northeast. And of course, our neighbours in Skipton have aspirations to reconnect to more of East Lancashire. And I wonder whether there is an opportunity there that should be included, or should we just concentrate on linking to Manchester and Sheffield, and so forth. I mean, there has merits, and that you can argue. The third area I wanted to consider was the education side of it, and I live in a notoriously poorly educated area, and speaking to our leader and discussing it with her, the problem with the post-16 education is the pre-16 education, which isn't up to standard, as we know in many schools, and two of the major grammar schools in my area have got very poor reports. And I wonder whether, because this is outside our control, because these are academies or etc., that is an area that's going wanting. And I'd be very keen to hear your comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, I'm sorry, Councillor, I don't know where your ward is. But I think there's a number of things. I think, first of all, the English Devolution White Paper, which was published just before Christmas, sets out the ambition to have mayors and combined authorities everywhere. And I think once you have a much clearer system of governance in England, then it'll make some of those cross-boundary links where those strong economic ties exist much easier. I think it comes back to the point that Barney makes. A lot of businesses don't work on local authority boundaries. I was at the launch of the White Rose Agreement, where the three mayors made the agreement about how they're going to work together. The Mayor of South Yorkshire announced that Yorkshire, as part of this, Yorkshire is going to get bigger, which I don't, whether that means we're going to, I'm not quite sure how that works, but I do think it is around that outward-looking, that outward-looking view that clearly where there are strong economic ties. Again, my ward's right on the eastern side of West Yorkshire. Loads of people in my ward work in York and North Yorkshire. Clearly, clearly part of this is around looking about how we can how we can strengthen those ties through it. I won't get into how we completely reconstruct the schools system in this country, but I do think, again, some of the it is something that around when we actually start having a proper skills plan for West Yorkshire and we start delivering that, then we can be, moving on to the single settlement we'll have fairly soon. Then we'll at least have the resources to address what we need to do in West Yorkshire. I'm sure officers might want to give a little bit more detail on that, but that's just my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I'll bring my colleague Sarah in to just say a little bit on the fine points of Innovation Centre of Excellence in a minute. But I'm really pleased you picked that out. Some of these things we write in these documents, you're never sure who's going to read it and what they're going to make of it. So I'm really happy that you got to that point and you picked that out. As Councillor Lewis said, we, for a long time, have had a deficit, at least, in our productivity. And you don't need to be a Nobel Prize-winning economist to know that to increase prosperity, the surest way economists have found is to increase productivity. And to increase productivity, we need to be more innovative. We need to be more innovative. And it's not just about doing new things, just doing what we do, what we have to do better, find new, different, better ways to do what we have to do, on top of new products and all of that. So in writing the local growth plan, it was clear to us that we need to have a better grip of what innovation means and how we enable that across this patch. So the concept of our Innovation Center of Excellence, at the time we wrote it, was simply a concept, it was an aspiration that we want West Yorkshire to be known as the place where if you've got a good idea for how to do something, you will be supported to develop that idea, and if it can be commercialized, you will get the support you need to commercialize it. And we will work with you, whoever you are, wherever you base within West Yorkshire. So to make all of West Yorkshire the place, the best place to commercialize great ideas. Now, once you begin to dig into that, there are all sorts of specific things that we have to do. What does center mean? Is it a building? Is it virtual? Is it a set of buildings? Is it a group of people? All of that is to be decided. And Sarah is working with the team through a lot of detail on that. But the aspiration is that we've got to be the place. And we might fail, that's great. But if we fail to get here and we get there, I think I can sleep a bit more at night. So our aspiration is to be the best place. If you've got a good idea, to get that idea from your brain onto wherever it needs to be commercialized, to create prosperity, to increase productivity and to create prosperity. So that's what we're working on. Sarah, do you want to say anything more about that before I try to answer any of the other questions?
Just to add, I mean, that aspiration is absolutely right, and it's a big aspiration, but we have already got some fantastic assets in West Yorkshire, 7 universities, some great businesses doing amazing things, some fantastic talent across the region, and connecting those more effectively together to do more, to be better, will have huge impetus, but also using this Centre of Excellence as an identity, as a brand, as something to shout about for West Yorkshire and raise our profile, because we're not great about shouting how great we are, how great the businesses we've got, how great the universities are, how great the assets are. So some of this is just about joining the dots together and really, really promoting West Yorkshire as an amazing place, which it is.
On the transport bit, I'm sure when you get the transport colleagues in, they can sort of tell you a bit more about connection to the Northwest, Northeast and others. But Councillor Lewis mentioned the White Rose Agreement. And one of the things that pulled out in the White Rose Agreement was transport and connectivity, as you would expect. I think Lord Blunkett is being brought on board to lead some work to help us think about this. And one of the key work streams that we've already started thinking about and doing some work on, and hopefully we can bring it through in some of the early phases of bus franchising, is the cross-boundary challenge. So if you live on the boundary of West Yorkshire, but you probably tend to work across that boundary into South Yorkshire, it's a different transport entities altogether. All of a sudden you're paying more money just because your pass is only valid for West Yorkshire and not for South Yorkshire. It doesn't really make sense. So mayors are committed to make sure that cross-boundary challenge can be overcome, and colleagues are already working on that. I'll bring Michelle in on the pre and post-16 bit. The only thing I'll say is we are engaged with government through the DEVO process on what post-16 role the combined authority should have. Views are mixed, but we're working on that, and I don't know whether we want to say more.
Yeah, thanks, Felix. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think what you got across really well and how you described that was the interdependencies between different parts of the system. So, you know, pressure in post-16 and then, of course, in adult skills, which is a devolved part of the system, is contributed to by issues at a younger age, as well as in the adult population. So I think that's a point well made.
at the complexity of the education, employment, and skills system is well known and fully acknowledged. And within that, the devolved parts of the system, as you will know, are around adult skills, particularly, so non-apprenticeship adult provision, and it is increasingly clear that that there needs to be some kind of regional role around at a younger age in order to make sure that not only we've got the quality, but also the sufficient and appropriate kind of places at a younger age. And so the local growth plan does start looking at the importance of West Yorkshire being a region of learning and creativity, which is about that performance, appropriateness at all ages. From earlier in school age, whereas you're absolutely right that the direct leavers at a regional level come in at 19. Actually, that you're picking up issues from younger in the system.
I'll make a start. So I think, noting the number of contributors on the committee, I'll try and be really quick. I think, so clearly we're talking about the economy function of the combined authority, but ultimately all the plans are owned by the mayor and the combined authority, and that's what drives forward. You're absolutely right. They are really interlinked, and it is a combined authority that does, it's a combined authority in the mayor and delivering on Tracy's mayoral pledges that brings all that together. Like I say, I won't get too much into transport. I've done the transport job before. Somebody else does it now. I won't go back over old ground. But that's probably one. But it is that one around where, like I say, that's the ultimate thing, and and it is the. And it is recognising the link between all of them. In terms of skills, you're right. I mean, having the dissolved skills budget meant we were able to step in very quickly and try and resolve the shortage of bus drivers. So use the skills work of the combined authority to support the transport work, like I say, very quickly stepping in. There are other areas. I mean, you're right as well. Local authority. I mean, Leeds Council's probably the biggest employer biggest single employer in Leeds. That's a huge footprint in the city in terms of number of people employed. And again, there's a lot of work we do as an organisation on using our apprenticeship levy with our existing workforce and picking up some of the areas of shortage as well. And that's something that recognising where we need to go, like if we want to deliver some of the things we want to deliver, we will need more transport planners, more town planners, and making sure I've got that pipeline of skills there. So I'll finish there, Chair.
I'm happy to hand over the skills bit to Michelle. Councillor Lewis has really picked up the other points. I think on the synergy bit, I'll just reassure you that we are aware of it, and organizations like ours cannot exist, it seems, sadly, without several strategies and plans, and it's just, so we understand, but we fully are aware of the links between them. So a couple of years ago, all the leaders and the mayor signed the West Yorkshire Plan, which is our headline, very, very high level document that sets out the 5 missions, etc. And beneath that is the local growth plan, which sets out how we're going to grow the economy. And everything else takes its leaf from that. So the local transport plan that is currently being written takes its leaf from the local growth plan. The climate and environment plan, absolutely linked to that. Business decarbonization within that sits with Sarah, for example. So we absolutely on that. We've got housing retrofit, all the skills implications on that Michelle is in charge of. So it's absolutely linked to that. Mass transit, we just got growth prospectus out, looking at supply chain, looking at skills, looking at the needs that the sector will have to rise to the challenge. My colleagues here wrote that the growth prospectus. So we are linking and aligning these things as much as it's possible to do, within our remit. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Michelle.
Well, only very briefly that you're quite right that what's in the local growth plan in regard to skills is fairly high level, isn't it? And I would have and it would be. I would like to draw your attention to the annual report that we will be publishing on adult skills funding that shows how devolved adult skills funding is being used to address different economic and social priorities. So how the funding is being best targeted at people and communities in the greatest need, but also how it's being used to address green skills, digital skills, which was mentioned earlier, and other sort of key areas of the economy. But you're right that in the local growth plan it's at fairly high level, but there are accompanying publications, which, as Felix described, dock into that, which do provide that level of detail, which I think would be really happy to send on to you when they come out.
No, it's just I think it's important to remember that most training happens in organisations, not just businesses. It's a large amount of money, and it's an awful lot of what we do. And our education system is vitally important, but an awful lot of this happens outside of that system.
I said no, very quickly. I think it's really important that when we talk about skills, we don't mix up skills and qualifications. I mean, we're clear about what it is we mean. And that's what I need to say on that, I think.
Thanks, Chair. I have a big problem with your map. I don't mind you using a map of any description, but I do wish it was accurate, and geographically it is so wrong. It's unbelievable, from a position of West Yorkshire to Greater Manchester. You said that the 300 years ago, this is how people got from A to B, and all you've done is follow the line of the map. Well, unless you were in Roman times and went on the Roman road, it was actually impossible to get from Halifax to Manchester on the line that you've drawn. And it is even more impossible at this current moment in time. Likewise, the same one from Huddersfield to Manchester. And I do feel that if we're going to use a map and we're going to put some arrows on it, we should make it geographically correct. And what is distinctly missing off here from a transport perspective, of course, is the M62. Does that road not exist? Is that road not part of the biggest problem that we've got in West Yorkshire, which is getting from one side to the other, and the M62? I just do not understand why you can put something on a piece of paper that is completely meaningless. There ain't a road from Halifax to Manchester, geographically, where you've put it. So nobody can go that way. There's nothing to take you that way. There is no rail network shown on here to get anywhere. I don't mind you doing something, but I do wish that it was correct, because otherwise the rest of the document becomes meaningless. You can't talk about education and skills and accessing and transport and everything else when the map that you're showing and the lines that you're showing are not in the right places. I'm sorry, I know I'm an old bag at times, but I really do feel that I don't mind what you do strategically to show whatever, but please let's have it correct. I've lived on that Yorkshire-Lancashire border now for 74 years of my life, which is all of it. And this, I don't even understand it. It isn't correct.
Yes, and I'm absolutely loving this, so thank you very much. The map has definitely done its job. I think where we have a difference of opinion, if I could respectfully add, is those black dots on the map are not intended to represent a particular train line or a road. It's just an indication that there's a connection between this point and that point. It's not a map that shows all the roads in West Yorkshire. It would have a different heading. It's not a map that shows the train lines or the Roman roads. It would have a different heading. It's simply saying there are destinations between these areas that matter to us. So we work, an iteration of this right now has all our key sites, okay? It's not meant, it's an illustration of where we're looking to put. That's why the colors in there begin to sort of change or go lighter as you go along. It's just to denote intensity. It's not meant to be an accurate road or rail or footpath representation of where everybody is going. It's simply an illustration based on where our places are and where our people move to and from. That's all it is. It does not mean that the facts in there about people not having the right level of qualifications or jobs, the underemployment or all those issues are wrong simply because we have a difference of opinion about what a map is denoting. If we wanted to show you a map about where the train stations are, we could have done that. That's not what we're trying to put across.
Because the biggest problem is with the map being wrong and not correct is the fact that I'm representing Calderdale here. All the rural areas around Calderdale to the western side do not show any connectivity whatsoever. Now, that is the issue. If you're wanting us to have connectivity of the area to get to education, skills and everything else, then that has got to be reflected somewhere in the map. I mean, you know, if you live in Todmorden, it's God help you can't go anywhere. If you live in Silsden or if you live in South Kirby, we've got to let people know that we are trying to work for them and trying to connect them. We know Leeds is the centre of the universe as far as the combined authority is concerned, and everything grows from that hub. We are aware of that, and we are aware of the reasons why. But as has been said on numerous occasions, and I said to the mayor as well, if you're wanting to improve the skills and the education of young people, you've got to give them some incentive to get from where they are to where you need them to go. Because otherwise, there's no incentive at all, because they can't get anywhere, because the transport is not reflected and the education on this map. And I think that's the problem for me. A strategic map should include other things.
Yeah, my father was born in Todmorden, so Matt. So put the, actually you used to not be able to get to Burnley directly. Todmorden's actually got quite dramatically improved transport connections in recent times, but there we go. I'm wanting to focus on what I would call inclusive growth, because the test for me is, I get all the bit about centres of excellence and high-tech innovation, and there is a concern about the university sector at the moment, but I'm sure you're looking into that. But I'm looking at no one left out, and I'm looking at the investment that's needed to get communities back into economic activity engagement with the labour market, and they're not all geographically remote at all. I give you Manningham, Beeston Hill, Thornton Lodge, Dewsbury Moor. All these are all places I've worked, by the way, but there we go. And I'm concerned about how we create the link with what you're calling the health and skills agenda, because there is some substantial work doing there, and it does link to education, because I work alongside an academy at the moment. We've got a long impact of COVID, and there's various reports come out in the last week about education, absence, engagement and outcomes, and this will require, inevitably, as we ad hoc reorganise local government without a Redcliffe Maud, you will need to have some footprint on school improvement and development through pre-16 to 16. David Blunkett's already flagged this up. If I'm allowed to mention the blessed memory of Tim Brighouse, this is what we need. You need some equivalent of the London Challenge so that you can connect vocational pathways with a revised curriculum. But I'm going to make a plea for what we used to call intermediate labour markets, because some of the situations that we're working with, I'm old enough to remember a thing called the community programme. Anybody else remember that? 75 quid a week for 3 days work, and when you got out of Armley and you went down to see Mr Berry at Dewsbury Probation Office, you got 3 days of work at Macro or wherever it was, acquiring skills. You got some dignity, got some independence. You settled your life down, and then you were able to engage with training and move forward. It took, and the private sector, Henry Boot, one of the biggest operators, if I remember rightly, we over-problematise some of these pathways with the people that we need to re-engage with economic activity and make part of our societies, because we've excluded far too many of them, and it's not going to help the whole West Yorkshire agenda if we have some great roaring away IT successes. No, that's really great, but you've then got your inclusion agenda, which in terms of health, well-being, poverty is expensive. It costs a lot of money. So I'm looking to see how we can make sure in everything we do that reaches into the areas of greatest economic distress who've had a terrible time the last 14 years, and we offer ladders for it. I mean, I believe there are some lessons from the past that can be updated so that we move people. We don't just sit them in rooms and talk at them. It's about getting people a lever up, a ladder up, so they feel part of things. And it is about those skills, because the apprenticeship agenda has been brilliantly colonised by the articulate middle class. I've got children of an age where many of their friends have worked out that getting a high level apprenticeship means you don't end up with university debt. Smart, great. Get me a plumber, get me an electrician, get me a bus driver. So things are a bit out of balance, but the plea I've got is to look at models of employment support that will reach into the communities that have been so marginalised. Matt represents Tong. In my time in council, Tong Homewood has been refurbished or socially programmed 3 times. The poverty has not moved.
Right, Martin or Barney, do you want to make any comments on what you've heard?
I think you've nailed the biggest challenge for me in all of this is where do you choose to invest the money, I'd love to have an answer, and I haven't got an answer. I can give you a partial answer of something you can do about that, and that's look at public procurement. Look at the amount of money that's spent just in the public sector every year in all of the organisations, and look at social value. Look at how social value can be used to benefit local communities, create the jobs that people in those communities can have. And I think it's a tool that it's a game-changing tool for me, and I think we need to look across the whole of the public sector and perhaps bring in some of the private sector, the big sort of tier 1 suppliers, and look at how we can maximise the benefits to solve exactly the kind of problems that you've mentioned.
Could I quickly add? I think also that there's a real role for small businesses in this. If you look at, there's evidence that FSB has produced in the past showing that small businesses are more likely to employ people who otherwise wouldn't be employed.
Absolutely.
And it's not because they've got strategies or this or that, it's because they tend to employ people from the same communities as them. And another thing I'd throw in is, as well as looking at employment, actually looking at supporting entrepreneurship, because especially, I mean, across West Yorkshire, actually we don't have enough businesses. Wakefield in particular, there's some real issues in terms of the amount of startups we have, and I think that's a real issue. And the final thing I just throw in, and it's actually to say, sort of supposed to big up something that Sarah's doing, which is around an investment strategy, because actually a lot could be unlocked if we could close some of the investment gap we have in West Yorkshire with businesses, which is a lot around the way the finance at the minute. A lot of people are lending to people who within 90 minutes drive is that, and they lend to people who look like them. So if you're if you're a woman running a business, you're less likely. If you're black, you're less likely. So, and if you're in West Yorkshire, you're less likely. So if you're a black woman in West Yorkshire, you've got almost no chance. So this work that Wicker's doing, I think, could be quite transformative actually if it comes through. And if it doesn't come through, then I think we've only got ourselves to blame.
I'm going to move on to the next question. So Councillor Rhodes is next, and then Councillor Blundell after that.
Thank you, Chair. Nice to see you, James, and keep supporting Leeds United. I'm there all the time. Okay, there's quite a lot being said, and I'm not going to go around reinventing the wheel on it. But Ralph, I have to say, I support every word you've said about the people, the skills that's needed. And it's all about, the document is all about, and I support Geraldine here, because this document is about corridors of opportunity. That's the heading. And in that document here, yes, we can have connectivity links that you've mentioned, Felix, but along that path, I've heard here today, and particularly from Barney, supported by Martin, is that the opportunity in terms of building up businesses, growth through that business is going to do everything for everybody, and in terms of how it happens and how we pull together all the partners within it is where I believe some emphasis should be placed. I can remember, Chair, coming to this meeting many years ago, before we had some changes, that one of the issues that we had a discussion paper on was to try and encourage pre-16 and post-16 into the skills system. And I recall, and I was astounded, that 2 officers from this authority, and forgive me if you're here, but I might have missed your names because I was so astounded back then, was the answer that we got as members was they had, quote unquote, great difficulty getting into schools and colleges. And I thought, why? Why just leave it at that? And the other angle, after asked the question why, was, well, can't you find other avenues to get into schools? Surely that's where things are started for pre and post 16. I have a couple of things in mind, Ralph, in what you've said in terms of skills and having equal opportunity and diversity. I didn't see much of that in here, to be honest. I know it's a background for everybody, but maybe I'm old in the tooth as well as Geraldine in remembering that a part of great skills for people who did need equality and opportunity was an organisation called Remploy.
Yes, it was. It was brilliant.
And we had a great organisation doing that in Wakefield. And we had people of various opportunity attainments, equality of skills in terms of disability that worked there. They worked, they gained a wage, they had pride, they had respect. And the government of the time stopped supporting it because most of the work through that was with a large organisation from government in actually delivering paper products on behalf of government offices. Now, I don't know where within your structure here today, and when you speak about Wakefield, both of you, I'm going to come into that in a moment, and the wider picture, where within this document can we see where some emphasis has been put on not just bricks and mortar, but we need to have something that will bring those skills back, that people will have respect and come out of there if they need to be with a skill that can earn money and go out in the larger economy. Is that part of opportunity or not? I don't see it here today. I think the approaches to this in terms of both yourselves, Barney and Martin, is have you approached universities going into preschool 16 and post 16? Because there is a big thing out there we've heard a lot about of late of people coming out of post 16 who seem to think that the world has neglected them and therefore their long-term future is not in terms of employment, but the position seems to be that if the welfare state is there, why is it neglecting me in terms of me going getting those opportunities? I remember as well that we had a discussion here, Chair, and you've mentioned it about refit of properties. I asked the question just after COVID, and I forget which officer we had, in terms of how many houses have we actually managed to refit? There had been a target of way above what I was told, and the target then was only 7,000. And the blame on that was because we don't have the skills. Well, I'll come back to skills again. Are we going to have the skills for the future? Yeah. Where's that coming from? What opportunities are going to be for apprenticeships? I know our council, over the years, and many, many years, has had an apprenticeship scheme. I had 3 of them at my health and social care meeting yesterday, scrutiny meeting. Young people in apprenticeships dealing with health and social care. And Ralph, you mentioned the health agenda as well. Very important in all of this document. And I was pleased that those young people wanted to see how scrutiny worked. So where is that element of apprenticeship? I don't know what other authorities do in terms of apprenticeships. Do you have a scheme? We have an average of an input twice a year of roughly about 24 young people. I'm really proud of that. So I don't know what you're doing in your own local authorities, or is that something that WICA, through your own agenda here on skills, and we're on about cross boundaries now, is that not something that should be the corridor of opportunity as well for skills? I also, Chair, I have to say, this, Obviously, we support all businesses. We do our best in Wakefield to support, and I don't want Wakefield decried here in any way, shape, or form, because I've heard it twice. But the outcomes of what I'm going to ask here and elsewhere, I'm sure my colleague and I will be delving a bit more into all of that. But you know, the paper does actually say the services, the ideas around the need for a much better, and this is a dichotomy in itself, front end. What's a front end, please? I'm sure we'd all like to know what a front end is. And we'll continue to support it if we know what the front end is. I love that expression. I'd love it, Chair. And then, of course, there's the other part in the report that we've got before us. And I know this is cross-boundary as well between all of you. It actually recognises there's a balance between local delivery and regional delivery. Now that will come under the Mayor's remit as well, in crossing boundaries with the other mayors. But I think we need to have that padded out or more information of what that's going to be. I could paper the town hall in Wakefield with strategies and promises and policies. I could paper the town hall and a note. But you know, the words are wonderful, but you have to have the background and sustainability to them. And then I understand we're doing a scope here. Understanding the scope, again, I'm up there and I've got front end. And then in another part of the document, I've got high growth. Now, that is obviously everybody's intention to have high growth. And we want to know in terms of the proposal, and you've got the wider businesses involved in it through your good selves. And that's how it should be. But you know, don't we need to know how we get to high growth? It's a wonderful world, and it's a great world for people that have, and they're on that ladder already. But we're talking about those that we need to get onto that ladder. And it's important that we have that high growth element. And I'm going to say as well, in the document, it does say about high growth, and I'm going back to where I started. It's got to be inclusive growth within our communities, Chair. Lovely words again, and the ethos of it in the plan has got to be admired. But you know what? All of us elected members around this table, and James knows and we all know it, go out there and explain this plan to people in your community. We do need an aid memoir on this. Go out there in all your wards and explain this to your community. Castleford, southeast of the district, Wakefield all the way around. And just say, well, we've got growth plans and we've got front end and sorry. I think the emphasis is great. I think the reasoning behind it is obviously in terms with the association with local plans and growth being, as Felix said, you've got different points in the year when there's, but surely that doesn't matter, because as these are going on, don't we collectively through WICA actually look to see what's happened in the local plans that might be 2 years over there or 3 years over there, that can put out there an example of what we can do, even if they are lagging behind. They've got to have a part to play. And that disparity is never going to change for a long, long time. And lastly, Chair, sorry, it's something else that I know that's going to happen, and we all know that's going to happen. We've got the bus franchise system. Obviously, I've spoken for many years, as my late husband, Keith, used to sit on the committee with James, about quality contracts. We have words in here about all of us, everybody around the table, connectivity. Connectivity for jobs, for shift workers. As the chair has said, we need to have that message going round and out there between the mayors, the connectivity across the branches, across the wards, across different areas, that we can say to people, yes, we know you work nights. Yes, we know it's bad at night time trying to get home, but this is what it's going to mean to you if this comes off. And can I lastly come back in terms of the points that have been made here by Barney and Martin in terms of the Chamber of Commerce. And obviously, you're working on a model here that's going to hopefully co-deliver between you and the public sector how things can be better. Well, you know, Wakefield is on a regeneration plan. I'll be the first to admit that I'm very worried, and it's not just Wakefield, about we call the small businesses. Everybody will welcome the pound shops because you can save money when the cost of living crisis has been so bad. But at a time, do you consider what the businesses need? What kind of businesses would you be approaching through the Chamber of Commerce? It's just not all one-sided when there's a partnership. What can we do when we're seeing shops that are boarded up and they're selling booze and all the rest of it in the windows? That's not just a shop that needs some investigation. They are in themselves businesses, but how do we promote more than what we're seeing in terms of what's happening? Do you have connections with these businesses? Are the members, Martin, of the Chamber of Trade? When you're talking about small businesses, Barney, do you consider those as small businesses? There may be 2 or 3 people working. And I do know even that some of the workers in them come from across boundary, like Bradford, into Wakefield. So I know some massive questions there, but I do think that there are issues here that look lovely, but the front end and the high growth and all the rest of it give us the basics in here on a plan that's going to sell this to the people. I know it's wide region, but we've got to do it, and we've got to go out and sell it as elected members.
Is presumably going to be in the implementation plan. When's that due to be in the public domain? Because I think that would answer a lot of Councillor Rhodes's questions.
I'll let you go first, Felix.
So, thank you. And again, really pleased you've taken your time to go through all the many words that we threw at you on the committee. So thank you very much. And a lot of the points you make, we couldn't agree more. I think, having said that, I would, if you don't mind, encourage you to look beyond the paper itself that came to you and look at the growth plan itself. Because the corridors of opportunity probably make up about 1/10 of what's in the growth plan. The growth plan has 5 priorities, and connectivity is just one of them. The growth plan, the 5 priorities pick up, yes, connectivity, but it picks up skills, it picks up our key sectors, it picks up the foundational economy, it keeps up growth in our places. So I can assure you that this is, the famous map that we've had a debate about, and everything around it. When it comes to transport and connectivity and the corridors of opportunity, that is just a part of the story that we're telling in the local growth plan. And there are other priorities in there and other areas of focus in there that hopefully mean that we've told a much rounded story about how we're looking to grow the economy in West Yorkshire. You talked about apprenticeships and how we work with business and some of the key points that Barney and Martin have made. Going back to the point the chair has just outlined, at the end of every section in the local growth plan, we summarize it with a set of actions. And the work that is going on right now is to turn those into actual implementation plans, and over time they will come to you. So there will not be one implementation plan for the local growth plan. It is not possible. There are so many things in here that if we did it in one document, you will paper more than Wakefield with everything that we produce. But within it, we talk about our sectors work. Next week, the Economic Committee is meeting and it's considering the growth plans, the action plans for how we grow sectors in West Yorkshire. Within it, we talk about a Centre of Excellence, as has been raised. At the Economic Committee next week, we're going into detail about our initial ideas about that, and on and on. So I can say that about virtually everything in there. Early years, All of those key actions in here, we are now taking forward into more detailed actions, and some of the actions are already underway. A lot of conversation already today has been around economic inactivity, work and health. Michelle and the team are already on with this. And from 1st of April next month, a lot of our delivery gets underway. So there's a lot that is already underway. There's more that is to come. There won't be a single implementation plan, but all the actions that we've set out there, we are committed to, will be mandated by our political leaders to make sure we have a good idea about how we're going to deliver all of that. And the work is already underway. I think some of the points you made, Councillor, are probably begun to bleed into the next couple of papers around the reviews. And I'm happy to talk about them now, but you might want to take them when that time comes in the agenda.
We've got the time is getting against us, so if you want to cover this now, so that we can open the debate out to wider than just the growth plan as well.
Okay, all right. So we launched, alongside the work we've done in the local growth plan, 2 reviews that worked almost concurrently, broadly around the same time. One is about our skills system. Okay, I use the word system loosely, and Michelle always gives me funny eyes when I do that. But essentially, as you know, the Combined Authority is quite a young organization. Yeah, the local authorities and the chambers and others have been here for centuries before us. And when the Combined Authority was created and our remit was inscribed in law, that remit included adult skills. And after that, we were given devolved responsibility with funding for post-19 adult skills training and employment since then, but the devolution is around skills. But we didn't really have a discussion and an agreement, particularly amongst the 6 partners, the 5 local authorities and the Combined Authority, about whose role is it to do what? And what is local, what is regional, how do we work together? On which issues do we work together? On which issues should we expect the Combined Authority to take the lead on? Because that is where it naturally fits for us to do whatever we need to do. And on which issues our local authority partners take the lead on? And even when we say local, what do we mean? Do we mean local authorities? Do we mean the voluntary sector? What do we mean by that? So we've taken a bit of time. This was really inward looking, as in us and our local authority partners, but also having conversations with FE colleges and others, just to make sure we clean our house and we have a good shared understanding of what our role is. And we understand what the system is that we're playing in and how we're going to do what we have to do. Because as you've all rightly said, the agenda is massive. And there's a lot of work to do. So that review has taken place, and now we're moving into the implementation of that. So we can go into detail of that. The second one is about business. We have a system, I use the word system again, we have an arrangement around how we provide business support. We have what we call a growth hub model, which is a bit hub and spoke. So we've got a gateway in the center, and we've got growth managers employed in local authorities, but the Combined Authority pays most of their wage, but we have arrangements here, and we work with our business representative partners. But what became very clear in developing the local growth plan is that, as I think Barney mentioned, yes, we have 100,000 businesses in West Yorkshire, but that is, 40,000 lower than it should be. 20,000 lower than it should be. We've got 1.2, 1.3 million people in employment in West Yorkshire. That is still about 40 to 50,000 lower than it should be. So we have arrangements that have been great, but actually we're not shifting the dial on the big things that matter. So we decided to look at that, how we offer business support, look at that again. And a key thing on our minds, which is partly why our colleagues are here right now, a key thing on our minds is to make sure that the Combined Authority at all times is adding value when we act. So we know that our business representative partners and our universities and colleges and others, sector bodies, offer business support out there anyway. So we need to make sure that when we work, we are adding value to what they do and we're not duplicating or detracting from what they already do, but we actually work together. So again, that's where that review is. So I know that there's some technical language in there around front end and all of that. But essentially, what we're trying to say is, irrespective of who you are and what business you run, when you encounter us and our partners, you should have the same quality of support consistently across West Yorkshire. That every business person should have access to the information they need, the support they need, should have the information they need to access all the programs and projects out there to enable them to grow their business. And we should make sure that whenever we act, we are acting together and we are duplicating. So that is what that review is trying to do. Sarah can give us chapter and verse on it if members are interested. But that is why we've got those two reviews, is to make sure that we've done our homework right, we've looked at the evidence, and we can now begin to set up arrangements that will actually add value. So that's what those two things are trying to do.
I'll add a couple of brief points beyond what Felix said. So firstly, just in terms of a couple of comments made, in terms of the Economy Committee, we do have the colleges and the universities sat around the table with us, and also, and it's really important, as colleague said to my left said, most training happens in a workplace, whether it's a public sector, private sector, voluntary sector, and the providers. A lot of the providers of apprenticeship training sit around the table with us as well. So we do have post-16 education sat around the table. If I may offer a personal observation, not necessarily that of West Yorkshire Combined Authorities officers or members, it would be better to have a greater links with the schools. I mean, I know from my own experience, we have a right patchwork out there with maintained schools, academies, free schools. Some will work really well with us, some won't, and to get that on a more consistent level. And my final point on that is, in West Yorkshire, it's not universal from Silsden to South Kirby, but we have a really strong base in further and higher education here across West Yorkshire. That's a strength for us. Just in terms of, you set a little bit of the challenge about, how Richard, my next door neighbour in Castleford, is a ward councillor. I'm not going to take round some of the reports we're talking about this morning to my community meetings tomorrow and say, people ask a question, well, here's a 100-page report. Believe me, when we sometimes get some of the reports on sort of really technical skills funding, they can be a lot more technical than we've got today. That's I'm not sure if that's a threat or a promise, but it is where we get to. And that's not, that's not what we take out to people. But you look about how does all this come together and take like our corner of Wakefield and Leeds. It might not be these reports that people see, but people see things like the development of production park in the area. That's part of this. They see some of the high growth businesses that are in the area. I'm trying to think of the sort of modern homes manufacturing Castleford we gave some money to some years ago. They see those businesses coming forward, a bit of the links to transport. For people that live in WF10, having platform 2 at Castleford Station and more trains to different areas. People extending platform 17 at Leeds Station, so it's easier to get on a train in Pontefract and Castleford to come to Leeds for people that work in Leeds city centre. So people like to say, I wouldn't take some of these papers out and sit there and read them out to people in a community meeting. I don't think. But they set the framework for what we want to achieve, and the outcomes people do see in like WF10, LS25, things like that, and that's it. And I think the final point as well, and it is really important, the work the Combined Authority does with all the different partners around it. If we are talking about how do we improve productivity and economic output in West Yorkshire, the high growth sectors we specialise in are a really important part of that, and that's something I'm going to be unapologetic about cherishing and supporting. And they're not universal ones. I'm chair of the Core Cities group. Other core cities, Bristol and Sheffield, will talk about defence, but they wouldn't talk about things that we've got. Liverpool and Newcastle might talk about life sciences and so on and so on. There's different things. West Midlands, Birmingham would talk about automotive. We have some of everything, but the high growth ones are the real clusters that will grow. The skills strategy, we've touched on some of it earlier around things like, again, coming back to WF10, the fact that we work to train bus drivers to work out of Arriva's depot in Castleford is part of that. Being very clear. There's people now in full-time jobs earning £30,000 a year that weren't before because of that, and that is That, alongside the other things we do, is fundamentally important to us if we want to get more money into people's pockets in West Yorkshire. It's a big part of it. You know, there's work we've done around telecoms and civils contractors. I'm sure Michelle and Felix could probably reel off a load more examples, but it is not just there is a few very high paid jobs and everybody else, well, can just get on with it. It really is that whole structure is important to us around how we get more money in the pockets of people working in West Yorkshire.
Yeah, I think you might have misunderstood our role in this, is that we're consultees and have been part of the development of this plan purely as consultees, representing as many private sector organisations as we can in delivery of it. Yeah. So but we already work with all of the local authorities at different levels in the development of their own economic plans and in their strategies to interact with businesses. And so we're already on with that, but directly in this, there is no implementation plan in place yet to know how we will be involved, or rather we haven't started those conversations. In fact, we're starting one Tuesday of next week.
That's interesting, so I'll wait for that, because I'm sure you'll have a comment on this.
Can I quickly just add, just really quickly, because I think the point was made that I was sort of decrying Wakefield in some way. If you want inclusive growth, you need growth. If you want to share the wealth, you're going to have someone who's going to create that wealth first. And that's why when we look at a lack of businesses or a shortfall in businesses, that's important. That's important to our communities, and we've got to do something about that. Quickly, I think there's a load of issues you raised around I think are going to be covered in the work, health and skills strategy that the combined authorities come up with, combined with the welfare changes that the government announced this week, combined with the Get Brim working. I'd be gobsmacked if those don't come back and you're not looking at that in a meeting in a well. And I just want to finally say, there was talk about high growth, and I think that's at the crux. And I don't want to lead you and say what you should be asking, but the question I think you should be asking is, if we're talking about, as Felix says, Wicker adding value, and if high growth businesses are important, you need to be asking, well, how do you help high growth businesses? Do you help high growth businesses by helping those who are going to be successful anyway, or is the way of identifying the businesses where the combined authorities' resources are going to make a difference and make them high growth? And I think that's how, and if you get the answer, I think that's what we need to be looking for, and I think that's the questions you should be asking if I can be as bold as that.
very happy to. Very, very quickly, I think I said in my earlier response, we will not be producing one implementation plan for the local growth plan. I don't want an action minute that says we have committed to write an implementation plan for the local growth plan. We will not be doing that. It is not possible. There are so many actions in there, and it is not possible to do that. It covers everything the Combined Authority does. What I said was, all the actions that we've committed to in here will come through in their own right, and you will have the opportunity to scrutinize them as they come along. But there will not be one implementation plan for the local growth plan. So please, I just want to clarify that. I completely take the point you made, Councillor Edwards, about the provision of specialist skills and us making sure we've got enough of that across the patch. And the particular point you make about scaffolders has come up. We've discussed that. But some of these specialist areas, and Michelle can give us more, the setup you need, the specialist skills you need, even the risk insurance that the providers require to be able to do it is such that there are only few places in the country that are set up to do that. And so there are certain things that we will have here that other places also don't have. And people from there will travel from there here to do that because we already have the setup for it. And likewise, there are certain things that we don't have here that people here might have to travel somewhere else for. Now, we could take the decision to say we will make sure we've got provision here for everything we need. That is a decision that our political leaders could make, and we'll have to find the money for it. Or we could enable and support our people who live here who need that support to be able to access that support there, especially if it's residential and there is some funding or whatever needed for them to be able to go down and do that. A lot of this also, and as Martin said, a lot of this training happens with employers. What we're looking at is how we can co-invest in this, because the Combined Authority cannot, with the best will in the world, fund every kind of training that everybody needs. So we're looking to work with employers to see how we can co-invest, especially when employers can see clear line of sight from their investment to the outcome of that investment, which is X number of people being skilled, come back in and support them to do what they have to do. So that is work that we're committed to doing, but we cannot commit to being able to provide every specialist training here in West Yorkshire. We simply cannot do that. Our providers here even do not want to do that because a lot of them are not set up to do all of it. But where we can, we absolutely will. I don't know whether there's any specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think Pathways Construction is a really good example there, isn't it? Where we need to find a way to get more to enable those pathways into employment and within employment as well. And there is an acute need for additional capacity to make that happen. Because it's actually it's an area where there is not only business demand but also huge amount of interest from entrants to the labour market as well. So it remains a very, very popular career. If we can make sure there's enough places. So really, really important area to raise.
Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get everybody who still make a contribution to make a contribution, and then if I can leave it up to our guests to pick the bones out of it and react accordingly. So I've got Councillor Brundle first of all, then Councillor Haig, then Councillor Lawson, then Councillor Merritt, then Councillor Jenkins. So Councillor Brundle first, please.
Thank you, and I'll try and be relatively brief. I think a lot has been covered since I put my hand up. It is probably a first that someone has mentioned Todmorden before I have in a meeting, and I think it would challenge the most sort of forgotten area, the sort of Lancashire in the address rather than Yorkshire, so it's definitely up there. So I will just echo the comments around that East Lancashire link. I don't want to return to the map conversation, but I think that is sort of the obvious omission for me coming from where I represent, that people work in Burnley, Rochdale Way, they don't come to Leeds really. So I just think that, is something to flag. Other things, so it's good to see the mention of the electrification of the Calder Valley line within the transport section. I'm conscious quite a lot within that transport sort of section is within the combined authorities remit within their say, and that is one thing that isn't. So I'm hoping that that is maybe a commitment to some lobbying or some conversations around that continuing, because I know it's been about a decade of that, and Tracy's probably been asked about that a lot. But yeah, good to see. It'd be nice to sort of have that commitment to continuing that conversation. I also wanted to ask around sort of the measure of success, and you've talked about aspiration and how even if you fail at some of it, that aspiration's still there. I think the problem, even as an elected member, never mind a member of the public, is there's always a strategy and there's always a plan and there's always a growth plan, and it's quite hard to then measure the success of that. And just wonder if you had any thoughts around sort of what that success would look like. I know it's hard to quantify and put numbers on, but yeah, as to when you'd say yes, this worked, would be good. And then just another brief comment, which something else reminded me of around the skills conversation, is there's the aspect of it that is, do people have the skills for what we need? The other aspect is we've got, for example, a large business in Todmorden called Weir Minerals, which has recently said they are closing. A lot of their manufacturing is moving to South Africa. They're moving a few jobs to Rochdale, which again, that East Lancashire Manchester link. But there is going to be several hundred people with quite specific manufacturing skills with nowhere to go from there. And I think it's, yeah, looking at it from the other angle of what skills do we have in a certain area and how do you then get the right business in that area, as well as working at it from the other angle of training people up with those skills. I think that was a brief run through of some thoughts, maybe more than questions, but thank you.
Thank you. Okay, right, Councillor Haig.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are really around the responsiveness and agility of our plans. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when a mouse was something that lived under the building and stole your sandwiches. And you know, and 5 years ago we were all gearing up to move, or many of us gearing up to move onto working entirely online, and we're now talking about at a national level many jobs, including possibly our own, being replaced by AI. And we've already discussed how, you know, local plans are at different stages. Of course, immediately you've written it down, it's out of date. And we're seeing things nationally, and I'd certainly be interested in knowing you know, what conversations we're having nationally about things that are going to come down the line from government and have direct impacts on our local economy. And we've just seen the NHS England announcement, and you know, definitely an ambition that's going to impact us on government on local civil service jobs. So when those things happen, you know, are we agile enough to adapt our plans to reskill people, move people into other areas of employment? And there is also, I think, we're looking at benefit changes that are coming down the line as well. There's going to be quite a demand for work readiness.
Yes.
And reskilling of people, and you know, have we got the capacity to do that? So really the questions are, you know, can we, you know, turn on a sixpence and meet that need? For those who remember what sixpences were.
Thank you. I can remember them, yes. Councillor Lawson and then Councillor Merritt.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, I'll try not to repeat other points, but just to extend something that Councillor Berry said, education, it's a principle, obviously it's taken as a principle elsewhere, and it's something that we're trying to deal with. I just want to be reassured that the risks of economic desertification, if you like, are not very great, so that we're not sucking life out of other communities, as Councillor Berry said, and other locations, other rural locations, for example. That was the first point. The other one was what seems to be relying upon the spending review. That seems to be our bit that's been from the papers. That said, how do we, what work can we do to preempt our implementation plans? What are our fast sprints, if we like to use old-fashioned project terminology? And I think things like the thing that Barney highlighted, looking at it at the moment, I find it recognisable in local authorities. I find it's like there's some very broad principles in our consultation at the moment, but I think we could probably do something else. Be a bit, well, take it into a different place so we can take this plan off the paper and get people excited about it, get businesses excited about it. I think that's our challenge.
Thank you. Councillor Merrick.
Yes, so I'll try and run through quickly. First question was about, in the main paper, we have the objective of boosting the region's fastest growing business sectors. Later on, we talk about high growth opportunity, and I was, wondering, how clear are we in terms of which we are doing? And we talk about fast growing business sectors. If it's fast growing and we're picking up jobs, maybe the issue's already dealt with. So I do wonder whether it should much more be focused on the opportunity. Other changes in government approach, clearly the defence sector is going to be a significant growth area. The existing industrial base in West Yorkshire still has a number of those capabilities, making sure that we're able to facilitate. So, I did wonder whether that first one's quite the right one, whether it's about, in effect, identifying should be much more about identifying the opportunities, tackling the bottlenecks, those sorts of things. Mr. Minot very much asked the supplementary question I was going to ask about that. I think we do, as a committee, need to come back to that. Picking up the discussion, the excellent discussion led by Councillor Berry in terms of skills and education and so on, and the role of the schools in this, which has been picked up by James as well. I wondered what conversations the Mayor is having in terms of those national discussions on the sorts of sets of issues around that. Are schools adequately focused on, what their kids are going to do when they leave, giving them the right sets of skills, giving them the right aspirations? We had a problem in the past in York where a lot of our traditional employers went down the tubes, and there was a real challenge with those kids. They saw what their fathers had done, and that had been where they'd been thinking of going, and they basically didn't know what or where to go, and the demotivation that followed from that. We've got to give people motivation, and again, this comes back to your locational strategy. If the real big challenges in terms of employment and inclusion are in the Wakefields and the Bradfords, how much are we going to focus the job opportunities, the new industries, the new skills in those areas? Because that's actually where you can start to change the kids' views of what opportunities they have, and you get that better inclusion that way. As I say, other quick questions. Looking at the two reviews, you're proposing a pretty centralised arrangement for the business support review, but you're maintaining a heavily devolved arrangement for the skills. And I can see why to some degree, but how are we going to ensure the effective coordination between those two legs with those two very different approaches? And a further point on the skills. You've got this 4-tier level, which, it says it's simple. I have to say, it didn't feel that way reading through it. And again, have you got the right balance, particularly between the 6 authority collaboration and the regional? If we need to have a strategic approach, particularly to the more specialist types of skills training and so on, whether it's out of region or whether it's in region, how much should that really be the region's strategic responsibility, and should, for instance, the labour market analysis be the regions rather than the six authority collaboration. I do have some questions whether the balance is quite right if you're going to really get that strategic grip and delivery. Yes, that one final minor, I say minor, in terms of the document, there seems to be very light on the opportunities from decarbonisation of the green industries. There's, I think, one trivial little reference, and so I did wonder about that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jenkins.
Yeah, so this is a very quick one. So in April 2024, the local enterprise partnerships were devolved to the combined authority, and yesterday they were abolished. So what are the implications?
Okay, right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go left to right. So start with Michelle. Is there anything you would like to comment on what you just heard?
Okay, so there were a theme of, sorry, I took notes on my phone. So there were a theme of comments around reskilling and whether that was in response to redundancy or to do with technological and industrial change. So there were a couple of examples in that kind of space. Retraining and upskilling is a key part of the system where we do have regional responsibility and are able to commission at pace the kind of courses that are most in demand in our economy. So yes, absolutely, we're able to be agile there. There are limitations to that, not least the capacity of the education and training system to respond. And that remains an area of really important strategic focus. So for example, in the areas that are the fastest growing and the most in demand, it's fairly obvious that you can earn more in industry than you can training the next generation. And that's an area that we really need to be able to collaborate with industry to address. So yes, retraining, upskilling, whether that's about technological change or whether that's about redundancy and relocation of businesses is absolutely the area that we have levers in. And work readiness, and there was a question about work readiness from Councillor Haigh, related, I think, to young people in particular, I think. But again, whether that's about young people, whether that's about post-19 coming out of education, or about people that are adults who've been out of work for some time, absolutely work readiness is an area where we have got levers and where a lot of devolved adult skills funding is spent to really, really good, really, really strong effect. There was a question then from Councillor Merritt about the Mayor's interest in schools and careers, that she would better able to answer that herself, but what I can tell you is that she's made specific commitment for West Yorkshire to be a region, become a region of learning and creativity, and she sees a commitment to all age careers as really central to delivering that. Now, for about 10 years, the Combined Authority has had a role in working with schools to improve connections between employers and education, through which we work with 181 schools. That is a great platform to build from, particularly into primaries. And you specifically talked about careers and ambition, and that's absolutely the kind of space that that she has said she's got priorities. A priority in. You also talked about, Councillor Merritt also asked a really interesting question. You've obviously read the papers in great detail about the kind of West Yorkshire approach to business engagement and the much more locally led kind of approach to skills in terms of individual engagement. I think really what you're seeing there is that when we're talking about people that are a long way from the labour market, the best route to engaging with them is at the most local level possible. And all the evidence tells us that. All the evidence tells us that the most effective way to engage with people is at the most local level possible. And particularly if we're talking about people a long way from the labour market or taking those first steps into learning or employment support, as you go up your educational and your earning kind of journey, the geographical footprint becomes bigger. So, you know, at level 3, you're looking at much more of a travel to work area across West Yorkshire. And businesses, of course, recruit from largely, but not exclusively, are interested in recruiting from a larger footprint, particularly if we're talking about high growth and innovative. And that's probably some of the reasoning. But I think it's that point that you made is one that we need to consider really carefully when we think about our routes to engagement with both individuals and employers and how that's best done. But it was an interesting contrast to draw. Thank you.
Thank you. Felix, do you want to?
Very, very quickly, I think Sarah, I'm sure, will pick up the point you made and why the business approach is the way it is, especially that middle bit of the triangle where we're trying to work with partners. Start with the easy ones first. Local enterprise partnership is coming to an end. We knew that was going to happen, which is why we set up the business board. So there's no gap, really. The business board is not doing exactly what the LEP used to do. It's a different entity altogether, but that was a key part of our response. So we are quite confident that we don't have a gap in our provision there. Decarbonisation, very good point, but the approach we took with this, the local growth plan is long enough. So the approach we took was where there's already a lot of work underway or there's already work completed, we wouldn't go to a lot of detail in the local growth plan about it. So you would notice in there, we don't say a lot about housing because we already have a housing strategy. So we refer to it and keep the key points. Likewise, in decarbonisation and net zero, the climate and environment plan is just coming out, if it's not come out already. So we did not feel it was necessary to go into a lot of detail on there. But please rest assured, that's taken incredibly seriously, and we've got the work being done there. A good point was made about densification and desertification, and the boil down to really the point you were making was around displacement. And the reassurance I can give you is that nothing comes through for approval to our political leaders if it's not been through certain tests. There are additionality tests that we put every spending decision through. The additionality test looks at substitution, it looks at leakage, and it looks at displacement. And the fourth is multipliers. So we do take account of that. We don't always get it right. It's not an exact science. The econometrics that goes into that nearly killed me in university. So I know exactly what it's like, but there's a lot of modeling and estimates going on there. But we do take account of it. So there's a point made about responsiveness and how agile we are, and that is linked to a point made earlier on around job losses in certain areas and how we mobilize. I suppose just two very quick things that I'll say around that. After the local growth plan was completed, the work and health agenda caught fire and accelerated. But we've been able to respond because the ethos and the principle of it is hardwired in the local growth plan anyway. So we've been able to mobilize, get ourselves together, and there's a lot of activity that has been kicked off and that is only going to grow. So we believe that we've got the required level of agility. It's never easy, especially when resources have to be redeployed, but we are aware of that. And linked to that around job losses, unfortunately, it's a fact of life, but we work very closely with our job center partners. We have responsiveness approach. So there's a deployment. Companies have to, above a certain number of job losses, they have to notify nationally. And there's a register that is kept, and we are notified of that. And we work with the job centers to make sure we can mobilize and provide the workers with whatever support they need. A lot of the time, a lot of them say they don't need our support, they are fine. But where they need our support, we are able to mobilize quickly with our partners to make sure people get the support they need.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be very quick. I'm not going to enter the map debate again. What I would say is it's about as quick to get to Todmorden on the train as it is to get to my Leeds Council ward on the bus from here. So, you know, and we can go around who represents the most out of the way areas. So I do think it is, but you know, there is a point there. There is a point there about how transport does underpin in West Yorkshire, where we don't have the density of transport networks. Even some of our comparator core cities and combined authorities have. How important that is for us, and that's why it is. How we present it, I think we've covered enough this morning, but it demonstrates that it's such an important issue for us. I mean, there's a question about agility and change that a few councillors brought up, things that are happening. I mean, NHS England specifically, we've been talking to the department this week around how changes in structures and getting rid of some of the bureaucracy that was put in over the last 15 years doesn't actually impact how work happens, and making sure we are at the centre of that. There's still going to be a lot of people in the Department for Health, which is a big employer in Leeds, and NHS England, another big employer who's still going to be doing work to deliver health services across the country. That's really important for us. There's also, because of the length of time the NHS has been based here, there's around, I think it's around 15,000 jobs around Leeds and the wider Yorkshire area that have come out of the NHS. It's really important we keep those at the centre. I'm going to ask AI what a sixpence is later. I'm too young to remember it. But I think, again, it is the whole agility, you know, it is the whole agility and responding to change point, I think, is something that again, has to be there. Again, 5 years, and I remember about just after Christmas in 2020, we were appointing a director of public health at Leeds Council. We were sat there, shall we ask the candidates about this virus we read about in the paper? And we all decided it wasn't worth it. There are more important things to ask about. So then our director of public health. So, you know, things can change. You know, I mean, COVID is an extreme example, but things can change really. Things can change really quickly, and it is having that, you know, responsiveness there. I mean, the densification point is an interesting one. So obviously, again, thinking back to COVID, so the evidence we have in Leeds, I know there's other to talk about Leeds because it's where I have the data, is some of the footfall in our town and district centres is higher than it was before COVID, because it's the areas where we, you know, think there's a more preponderance of people working from home. Some of the areas of Leeds, like my own ward, where we know people sort of tend to do more blue collar jobs, where they go to a workplace or drive a vehicle or something like that. That's not the case. So there is recognising some of these changes are happening. I think the central thing about densification, though, is that it is, you know, I said it earlier, not everywhere in West Yorkshire is suitable for increased property development, transport infrastructure, energy requirements, and things like that. But it is something that you know, is going to be an important part of our economic growth, and how we use the rest of it to bring people together. The high growth point, again, is another interesting one. I could spend a long time on. I think it is recognising, first of all, some of the potential for high growth. How do we make sure we're at the front of it? If AI is going to be really important in tech and delivery of public and private services, we need to be at the centre of that. And we've got some real sort of historic strength in Leeds and West Yorkshire, going back to, you know, the development of financial and building societies years ago, about and how the hardware of the internet was put together. That gives us some real potential strengths from there. We've got to really, whether it's collectively sectors or individual businesses, lean in on that. There's other things in terms of going right back to where we started council around our local development frameworks, actually making sure we've got the sites available for a lot of planning. We get hooked upon, when we talk about in our council, we get hooked on housing numbers and where housing goes, but actually land for industrial and commercial development, and making sure it's got access to 20 years ago it would be access to roads. Now we're talking about access to energy, connections to the grid, where that power comes from, as well. So that sort of around high growth industry, if part of that is having the right sites available with the right infrastructure, like I said, that's a requirement. Now and again, history of part of sort of coal and generation in parts of West Yorkshire have really good grid connectivity, making sure we've got our land use planning right as part of that to make sure it goes forward. And I'll just pick up Councillor Jenkins' question about the LEP. So we in West Yorkshire, the LEP and the Combined Authority, worked as a single organisation for quite a long time. I don't think that was the case in every part of the country. So some of the formal legislative changes you refer to actually here, in practical terms, in West Yorkshire have been in place for a long time. So the LEP chair was always a voting member of the Combined Authority, going back to when the Combined Authority was formed. So it's always been, I think we're probably, and other places have been in a similar position to us, but some of the formal legislative changes, we're probably a little bit ahead of, always been ahead of that. Mandy Ridyard, who's the chair of the Business Board, which is a sort of successor body to the LEP. I know she couldn't be here this morning, but she's on the Combined Authority and has brought that work, work forward. So the LEP and the old LEP is part of the work of the Combined Authority and has been for a while.
Thank you. Martin?
Thank you. We are not a political organisation, so none of these points are meant to be political. But your point about the work readiness, I think, is very accurate. But we now have an additional problem that changes to employment legislation mean that the opportunities for those people to find employment are getting limited. We're already hearing from lots of organisations that are less likely to give people a chance that they would have done previously. And I think we need to definitely be wary of that because it's going to cause a problem. Then secondly, just a general point about skills funding. The majority of our skills funding currently is aimed at giving individuals the skills, not to address organisational or employment requirements or regional requirements, and that's just the way that the funding works. And so we have to work within those restraints or try and lobby to get those rules changed so that we can address all of the needs that we all have, both as businesses and other organisations in regions to address those skills. The business support, or the review of business support that's currently going underway and the centralisation of it, just as a personal comment on this, is that for the last 10, 12 years, business support, again driven by the funding streams, has come from numerous different government departments, numerous different organisations, to delivery locally through all sorts of different bodies and contracts. And the result of that is it's been very confusing to businesses to access. And so some kind of centralisation of even message makes that much better and less confusing for business, and means they're more likely to get the help that they want if they're looking at starting a business or growing a business, or they're looking to export for the first time. And then just a final thing, and I'm going to make a map point, I'm afraid, Felix, but I'm colourblind. So those colours meant nothing to me.
Thank you. Barney?
Thanks for that. I think quite a lot of the points made there sort of reflect that strategies like these will always have to identify areas to focus on. You can't just say we'll go for everything, and that means there's going to be potentially winners and losers. But I think it's really important, and I hope it's a role of you as a committee, but it's definitely what the FSB always do. We make sure that as far as possible people don't get left behind, businesses don't get left behind or ignored. I think just a quick example of why this is important. So within a growth strategy, retail and hospitality will never be included because it's low productivity. It's not seen as important. However, you think about your own town or city. Visitors to that town or city, what they think of it will be entirely based, or not entirely, but 90% based on the retail and hospitality offer. And they'll go away thinking about Todmorden, I'll mention Todmorden again, or Keighley, or wherever, and it'll be about what the retail and hospitality is, and that will affect, actually, can make a big effect on investment and on all other things. So even if it's not in the strategy, these things are important, and FSB recognises that. I actually think the Combined Authority do. So I think you as a committee need to keep pushing on that, hopefully. And the only other thing I'll say, the final thing I'll say, is I think the secret to success of these strategies, and it's something that I've sort of grappled with whilst I've worked for the FSB, really key is understanding what the Combined Authority can actually do. We've got an economy out there with loads of actors. We've got a government, who have a bigger impact than the Combined Authority do. It's a free market we exist in. You can't change a lot of these things, or you can only influence at the edges. So it's understanding what power you have and how you can best use that, and that's what's going to make these things work.
Thank you. And last by no means least, Sarah.
Thank you. I'll keep this brief, but just two things. So on the high growth potential discussion, just to reassure, we are looking at that as part of the implementation, so that will be being discussed going forwards. What do we actually mean and where we target that? And then on the centralisation of the business support infrastructure, Martin's absolutely right when he says it needs some level of consistency and coordination. But I'd actually describe it as less centralised than before. Previously, we had a model that was very much CA and local authority, which was the infrastructure, and we are not the business support ecosystem. So actually this new model is working much more effectively with the likes of the Chambers and the FSB to make sure we've got a federated growth model, so that absolutely there is no wrong door for a business. Wherever they go, wherever their entry point is, they will get signposted, navigated to the right support at the right time. So it's a much more federated model than it probably was before, but in a coherent and coordinated way.
Thank you. Right, so we've had an excellent debate and an excellent discussion, and we've certainly talked about a map, which for good or for bad. Right, if as a result of the contributions anyone's made today, there's any questions that suddenly, you get a eureka moment when you're sitting on the train and it's hanging outside a station, it never seems to be moving. If you want to submit the question in to Katie, she can try and get an answer for you if there's something that occurs to you, because towards the end of the meeting we've had to move things along at a pace, which meant that not everybody's had the same opportunity. So if something arises, I try to be as equal as I possibly can. But can I thank our guests for coming along, particularly to Barney and Martin, who were given quite short notice that they were needing to do it. So thank you very much. You're welcome to stay for the last item, but if you want to get off and get some lunch, you are free to go. We're now on to item 6, which is the work programme and the members' update. The work programme is as, and is there anybody who want to make any comments under the members' updates? It wasn't made yet.
I don't know whether it's appropriate to bring it to this meeting, but there is concerns around, and it's not just on this, it's been other things as well, on what land is owned by various bodies. And as we are aware, when the Combined Authority came into place, prior to that there was Government Office, prior to that it was West Yorkshire up to 1992. There is this disparate view of who owns land around and about, and I wonder if we could have an update on where that sits, and if some of the West Yorkshire land came in this direction. One of the main issues is that we have a big problem at junction 22 of the M62. It is getting flighted unmercilessly, and nobody will accept ownership of the land. So with Yorkshire Water fighting the corner, with Highways England fighting the corner, Calderdale Council never has owned the land, but it was part of Wakefield in days gone by and came under West Yorkshire because it was an urban district area. So it is so complex, and I wondered if there's a mechanism of finding these things out so that we can work better, more effectively.
Now that the authority have appointed an asset manager, I think we can refer that to them. They'll be able to do something about that. But yeah, good point.
It is problematic because the land originally was allocated to Wakefield Council because it was gathering grounds for the reservoirs.
Yeah.
But that's going back. There's only 2 of us in the room. I'll remember that. I think really. But then it just makes it so difficult. We've got this mega problem.
I think we can find that information out. Anything else? Yes.
Yeah, I've got one on retrofitting homes.
Yeah.
It's in the report. We're going to retrofit about 1,500 social houses. I'm just wondering if there's any latitude in that there to put a battery in, because solar in itself might serve them well during the day, but in the evening when your solar's gone, there's absolutely zero coming from the grid, so it might be worth putting a small battery in so that there's a reserve for some of these social housing tenants.
Yeah. Makes sense, Councillor Merrick?
Yes, looking at the forward plan of key decisions and more particularly a number of the officer delegated decisions, there's quite a number of capital schemes where additional monies are being asked for. I just wondered what performance information there is available in terms of how well capital programme is being delivered in terms of budget and in terms of being on time.
That's one of the things I'll miss Councillor Barnes for.
Yeah.
He kept me fully up to date on that, so that's one of the things I'll miss him on.
Yeah. Well,
But yes, I think we do
happy
need
to ask the question.
get that information. Yeah, yeah, no, that's true. Councillor Carter.
Yeah, could I just add another one now? It's come to my notice this week that a lot of people are suffering issues with landlines because BT are changing the mechanism of landlines and making them digital. And if you haven't got a digital phone, you will lose your landline capability. And I've just wondered if it was something that we wanted to look at to see how it's happening across the region, because it's just bonkers to me that BT can just decide to do something.
5 years ago they were doing this.
But nobody's ever known since. They've never communicated, have they?
We've been working with older people, age concern and others getting stuff. I mean, I'm sure there will be people who will be affected by it and we need to do things. I don't think it sits here. I think it's definitely a district thing for your local partnerships and working with vulnerable people. I'm aware of what that means because I work with vulnerable families, but it's not new. I mean, you know, it's like going from coal gas to...
Well, yeah. Well, we'll let Khaled and Katie do some research on that, and I mean, I would have thought it'd be, to be quite frank, it's more a localised.
We'll have a digital inclusion team in your local authority.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and I've been a victim of it myself, Geraldine, when I had a new system put in by Vodafone, and I'll name them as a company. Anyway, the problem is that there's packages around that you can put in, but if it isn't notified to people or they make inquiries through whoever, their line is cut off, which actually then cuts off the care link system to their homes, which is about to go to provide exactly as well. And up and down the country, there's been instances, and I've been through it, I've been through it, I had to pay an extra £120 to a ex-employee technician to come and rectify mine. Now, up and down the country at the same time, there's been all these cases of elderly people who suddenly have been cut off, and then it is, there's no connectivity with anybody, and families have actually been hurt. So, Geraldine, it is happening, and in fact, I'll tell you the other thing that's happening as well. There seems to be out there a perception that if somebody is going to change their provider, you are immediately on that provider, and the provider I had, which is the post office, when I notified or whatever, they cut me off the very day I notified them, and I got £120 to get a BT technician in. So there's a lot around it, Chair, and if it gets publicity out of this committee, I think out there it will be wonderful, because I think, Chair, we do lack from the committee any knowledge of what we're looking at in the community. Publicity is a great thing.
Even if we can get the connections in each local authority that people need to contact.
I had no mobile connection this morning, I've no network phones.
Right. Yeah, right. And so if there's nothing more, yeah.
I one more. So it's from the report of the Brownfield Fund thing, I think we've
Yeah.
talked about it. I know you've had a briefing on it, but I was wondering if it's worth really doing a big workshop on that. I don't know if anyone would be interested in the Brownfield Fund.
Well, when you look at where the schemes have been allocated under the brownfield, and there was some money left over, to the best of my knowledge, the government have relaxed some of the criteria, and they have extended the period of time that WICA can spend the money in. But I think we've all probably got schemes in our own areas that might benefit from being brought forward quicker, because they tend to bring affordable housing with them. Not in every single case, but tend to. So I think, yes, what we'll do is we'll take that up, because I mentioned it yesterday. I got a briefing yesterday. What was the answer I got, Katie? It was to be passed to somebody else, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It's, yeah.
But I suppose the question I had then was how it links into promoting, cross-promoting it across the LAs. And there's quite a lot of work, I think, in terms of what WICA is doing to make sure that fund's being not underspent.
Yeah.
Just got an email this morning about Brownfield site update from my local authority, and I've had a quick look at it on the map, and there's 2 sites being quoted on that map that have been built on that aren't brownfield sites anymore. So I think it, it is relevant.
But certainly, as a result of Councillor Edwards raising the issue with me yesterday morning, Katie and I raised it yesterday when we got the briefing on housing, and we've agreed to follow it up, and we'll notify everybody of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair.
So,
I'm feeling. We'll go back down here again.
okay, no problem at all. Right, so in that case, is anything else?
Chair, could I just commend the work plan on several
Yeah.
issues, but I think there are priorities within it that we ought to be considering in terms of agenda updates.
Yes.
And I think one of those is the devolution and governance that we spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
I know we've said about we need quote whatever, but could I suggest that that's an item on the agenda as a priority, because these things are coming fast at us, and an update would be very important.
Yep, I totally agree.
Did we get a date, Chair?
Not yet.
No. Right, so in that case, thank you all very much for your time. The next meeting is on the 2nd of May, and then there's a provisional one of the 18th of July, subject to people being reappointed from their councils after the AGMs. I don't know what we'll do if all of a sudden everybody who comes along after the AGMs can't attend on the 18th of July. I don't know what we would do then. It would be a real mess. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.